please welcome Jorge.
Okay. So hello everyone. So nice to see how BSides is growing. So thanks for everyone for organizing this. And today I'm going to talk. I'm Jorge, and today I'm going to talk about performing phishing engagements in really challenging environments. You were expecting my colleague Fabi today, he's the original author of this research with Danny, but unfortunately things happening and he has COVID, and his most likely replacement is right now in New York in vacation, so that ended up with me basically stealing their research. So yeah, hopefully you like it. Also, thanks a lot to Jacob and Matthias for their support. It was really much appreciated. And yeah, you also might know me because I was also here last year presenting about EDR evasion. So I feel like we are ending a cycle here with this initial access. So now getting back to a red team engagement, you can see that there's 3 phases, and today we are going to specifically focus on the initial compromise. So how we get into an organization and how we land a foothold to basically be within the organization environment and exploit new targets. And this talk starts, and the idea of this talk is because as a red teamers, we realize that phishing has become extremely harder, and is becoming harder each day. Last year, I was here talking about something called malware phishing, and it was because I remember a few years back, it was really easy to just go into an organization and just fish for credentials and just connect to its VPN with no further problem. But because of how we are facing the environments, right now we need to do stuff like malware phishing. In malware phishing, we create a binary or a malicious executable that lands on the system, and we try to maintain and persist our access. But the problem here is that EDRs are improving, and basically EDRs are everywhere. So right now, it's not so easy to also deliver malware into a really sophisticated organization. If you want to know more, you can see Jorge's, which is me, talking in Hacking the Box last year in Singapore, or even like the one at BSides. And now today we are going to focus about something different, which is credential phishing. In credential phishing, as I told you before, it was really easy a few years back. You just fish for credentials, and you have access to its VPN, so you can conduct your actions freely. Now it's not the case anymore, because first, MFA is basically deployed everywhere, which means that you don't only need to fish for the credentials, but also for the MFA code, which creates more complex attack kill chains. And secondly, this makes it really hard to maintain your access, because the MFA code is only valid once. So you need to find a reliable way of keeping your access and enroll a new device. Today, we are going to show you some examples of how us as a red teamers deal with MFA. First, let's have a look at how usually hackers approach phishing in environments with MFA. The first technique we are going to talk about is called reverse proxying, and it's basically the de facto standard for performing these kind of attacks. In this example, I'm going to show you the graph, and I hopefully explain it correctly so you can understand, but it can be a bit complex. We are using a tool named EvilJinx, which is basically the easiest way of weaponize this kind of attacks. And the flow is quite simple. So first, we as an attacker create a fake website in attacker.com that mirrors the original site. And we send a link to our target, and when the target opens the website, it sees a replica of the website he usually used to log in. So it makes sense, right? Like, I'm sent a link, I just log in the site I always log in. So secondly, what we do is that in this website we created, we proxied all the requests to the original site. So the authentication actually happens in the original site. Once the victim realizes that the website is legit and that everything we are doing is correct, introduces both credentials and 2FA code if that's the case. And finally, we just capture the credentials and session cookies and then reuse them in further attacks. Of course, the flow is just as simple as it seems. We set the server with the reverse proxying all the requests to our final target, and the user just enters its credentials, and we get the session. But of course, as this was a pretty simple technique, companies have realized that maybe there's something we can do to prevent this, of course. And a lot of companies are actually now implementing some kind of protections that prevent this from happening in the first place. Today, we are going to talk about some JavaScript-based phishing protections that we are now facing in some of the most important and relevant sites we need to phish. The JavaScript protection is actually quite simple. It's JavaScript code that is executing on the client browser and that checks, for example, if the domain name is the same as it should be. For example, in this case, you see that the JavaScript code checks if the attacker.com domain is the company.com domain. And as it sees that the domain name doesn't match, it realizes that this is not this is indeed a malicious action, so it completely breaks the login flow. It completely breaks the authentication, and the authentication fails. Some of you might be thinking, oh, but that's client code. Then we can just modify it. And that's correct. But the problem here is that basically this code is minified, it changes regularly, and the third problem we face is that you need to invest a lot of time to basically overcome this problem. And in the end, it's not worth it, because in campaigns that used to take quite some time, we need to optimize our resources. So we needed to find a successful and sustainable way of conducting these kind of engagements against sites that are implementing these kind of protections. And that's when we realized that we need to create something new. We implemented our own phishing setup, and we solved the problem by using something called browser instrumentation. Again, let's get back at a different graph, and the first step is the same. The user opens a website that, in this case, is not mirroring the original site by just recreating the original site. We are just creating a fake website that mirrors the content of the original site. The victim opens the website and says, OK, it's what I was expecting. It's asking me to log in. So the victim logs in and introduces its credentials. And optionally, is two-factor authentication code in case it exists. But what we are doing now is a bit different. Once we grab those credentials, we spawn a new browser, and basically we use this browser to authenticate against the real website. That means that the JavaScript code is going to check for the domain, and as the authentication is happening in a browser in the real website, the authentication is going to be successful, because in this case, the JavaScript code that is checking the domain is going to realize that the domain is the same one, because the authentication is actually happening in the real website. Once it is successful, we just grab the session and the cookies, and we can perform our actions. As you can see, this flow is a bit different. In the first example, we were proxying all the requests in real time to the original website. And here you can think it a bit differently. You can think, for example, if I phish someone, I get his credentials, and I can use them in a later point. It doesn't even need to be automated. I just phish for them and then reuse them. It's automated because basically the 2FA codes have a really short time lifespan, so it needs to be quick. But if you think about credentials, this is like the simplest approach to do it, because we are just first gathering the credentials and then reusing them in a different browser, as a user would do. To use this is what we call browser instrumentations, because the authentication flow is basically designed to be run automatically. The browser just conducts the actions automatically. Some other people also realized that this was a sustainable way of fighting this problem, and that's the reason Kuba, the author of Evil Jinx, which is the tool I shared before, implemented its own approach called Evil Puppet, which is part of Evil Jinx Pro. But even if we have solved this problem, and now we can fight JavaScript protections, we realize that there's new protections that we need to face, and that there's no way we can do that with a fake domain. That's when passkey, YubiKey, or other kind of authentications arrive, and there's FIDO2. And FIDO2 prevents completely these kind of attacks. I'll explain you why. So I'll try my best, but I'm not an expert in this, so I'll try to make it really simple. What we did here is that in FIDO2, in this hardware MFA devices, the MFA is not a simple MFA code, but the MFA process is being signed with the original domain. So what is going to happen is that when the user goes to the website and signs and uses its hardware key, the MFA token is going to be signed for attacker.com. And when we try the authentication in company.com, it's going to fail because it's going to realize, OK, that's not the domain I was authenticating for. But we can bypass it, or that's what we realized. In some scenarios, in a recent challenge, basically, we were targeting an organization that was based on GitHub and basically enforced the use of hardware keys everywhere. So that was quite a challenging environment for us because we never faced something like that. And we realized that even if you implement it, if you don't implement it properly and consistently, you can still bypass it. We did this for GitHub, and this was based on 3 problems. The first problem, GitHub forces you to have a legacy MFA service. That means you need to have TOTP or SMS or anything of the first things I explained to you in the first slides. Secondly, GitHub allows you to request through its API the GPG key names for some of the users, which means that the YubiKey information might be stored there, and you can use that to build a trustful story in a phishing campaign. And the third problem, and one of the biggest, is that you can view recovery codes up to 15 minutes after login. So once you logged in, you can use those recovery codes to add new MFA devices and basically complete a full account takeover. You can log in whenever you want. But now let's have a look again at the same graph as before, and you'll see just a slight difference. First, the user opens the website with a recreation of the original GitHub site. But in this case, what we are doing is that we are showcasing the 2 first problems I mentioned. The first, we are forcing the user to use its legacy MFA implementation, so TOTP or SMS, because it's mandatory by GitHub. And secondly, we are showcasing the YubiKey name of the user to tell him, OK, your YubiKey is not working. Right now, we don't support hardware authentication. Please use your legacy MFA implementation that we asked you to have. The user is like, OK, if that's the case, I just go to my phone and get the TOTP. And then he introduces both credentials and TOTP. And as I told you before, we just, again, spawn a new browser and relay this whole authentication to GitHub, obtaining then a session and a cookie. So the thing is basically it's the same attack. And this is basically possible because GitHub enforces the use of legacy protocols. So even if we are forced to use hardware MFA everywhere, if we are still forced to use legacy in any way, the attacker can still trick the user into using these legacy protocols that doesn't prevent this kind of attacks. Also, the third problem is, I told you, you can view recovery codes up to 15 minutes after login, and there's no alert on this. So it was quite stealthy for us. We could just compromise the account of a really technical administrator of the organization, so technical people also can be phished. And secondly, we can just completely compromise the account by using its recovery code. We inform GitHub thanks to this, and thanks to you all, now this is fixed, and recovery codes now trigger an alert whenever this happens. And now there's a demo that my colleagues have prepared, so thanks a lot for that. Now I don't know the setup, so I think I go next, and it starts playing. You can see what basically I explained. It says that the YubiKey is not working, so you need to use your TOTP, your legacy MFA implementation. You can see first that the credentials are going to be wrong to show you that it's actually working. Here's when, in the real browser, we go to the legacy implementation to showcase that we can use that. And now we're logged in. And the user gets redirected to a random website. And I think that's all. Yeah. So what we can get from here, there's like 3 takeaways. The first is that JavaScript code can be evaded by user browser instrumentation. That's the first thing. You can also modify the client code, but as I told you, it's really not sustainable. Second part, you can completely defeat these domain-based phishing attempts by just using hardware keys. But third, if you don't get rid of your fallback methods, you still are going to face the same problem because attackers can force your users to downgrade to other protocols that are not secure. And that's all for today.
Thank you very much. And also thanks to the colleagues that helped out with the last-minute schedule changes to make this happen. We have time for questions. I think it's a fair game if the colleagues want to help out with some questions and answers, to also help out. Do we have questions? Yes.
Okay. I'll try my best.
Thanks for the talk. Do you have any insights on how well this browser relay attack can be prevented by conditional access policies for sign-ins? Well, not in the GitHub context, but for Azure AD, for example?
To be honest, I don't. I think if you can help me.
So, I mean, it can be, to a large degree, prevented, depending on your conditional access policies, right? But I think there are options to make sure that there are company devices used to log in, and I think in that case, that should prevent that type of use case, because the browser on the server of the attacker does not have the company device certificate, for example. But I'm sure there are also complexities in how to configure that, and there probably are ways how to fuck it up.
Thank you. Yeah.
One question I had was, this isn't much less of a cat and mouse than the browser running things, trying to protect itself, like the app on the browser running things to try to protect itself, where they can have JavaScript check things that you can then try to bypass, and that's a lot of work, as you mentioned. But if the vendors started caring about these attacks, they could apply the same kind of techniques that they use to, for example, get rid of bots in social media, where they will try to detect your scripted browser and maybe use the WebGL APIs to fingerprint you and stuff like that. Are you seeing these ever, will the vendors care about this? Are you seeing any of this being detected? And does this work in other things than GitHub?
I know that in some scenarios, they try to detect when you're running a headless browser, for example. But if you use a custom implementation, of course, it's like really hard to detect. And also, trying to block bots, for example, this kind of activity might be expensive or might be quite difficult to implement. So I think right now it's becoming more and more common, so there might be protections coming. But for now, I think it's quite successful mostly everywhere.
I see. Thank you.
More questions? 1 second.
Thank you for the talk and jumping in for your colleagues. You mentioned the legacy mechanisms. and that at the end we are talking about downgrade attacks, and that the legacy mechanisms should be removed. Now, there's of course a reason why they are there. What would be an efficient and working alternative?
I mean,
So
it's
yeah.
yeah, like you mean an alternative of not using a fallback method?
Exactly, because there are reasons why we have fallback methods. We have fallback methods to logging in somewhere, and your token is broken, you're on holidays, whatsoever. I mean, one of the simple solutions would be, well, you're logged out. Is there anything you can think about or your colleagues did for
like
solving that?
Like, I think it's a tricky question because, of course, fallback legacy methods are not secure, but also it's like hard to implement for a company like just a hardware MFA authentication, right? And it's like a tricky question. As a recommendation, we said that okay, throw your fallback method and just keep to YubiKeys or just keep to hardware authentications. But we know it's not like a super sustainable way because of some processes might be affected by this. So it's a really tricky scenario, and it's solutions obviously have some friction and compromises always.
So we also think it really depends on who the target is, right? So for GitHub, they offer a service for free to a mass of people. So they need some flows that are more or less automated. So I can understand that they want to have this type of fallback. But I think if now you pay for GitHub for whatever reason as an organization, you should have the option to have a stronger control if your organization has some support flows, right? And I think the fallback method is if you are a company that you have some support people and you have a support flow to recover your access. Of course, you need to also be able to secure your support flow, right? That your customer support doesn't just unlock any account when they are called. But I think for high security organizations, they should be able to afford a support flow that lets people recover their accounts.
Thanks. I think I saw another hand at this side. Is that right? Okay. Do we have more questions? That's mean. At the very back.
Be very quick, but I noticed during the demo that the target was logging on, and so we also got logged on. Was it that both of them will be logged on to the same session? So is it like concurrent, or did I not understand that part?
Yes, as far as I know, yeah, we reuse this, like you can use both sessions. You just steal the session and redirect the target to the original site, so you can keep both.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more hands? Looks good. I think you're safe, Jorge.
I think there's one more question.
What just came to my mind is how would the situation change if we use an app for multi-factor authentication, like a lot of banks are doing, or GitHub also has a way to confirm the login by the app, I think.
Sorry, say again?
How would the situation look like if we use an app to confirm the login? Like, is it also possible to circumvent that? For example, like what you were doing with using the multi-factor authentication by SMS. Was that also possible to use that as a way to log in?
I mean, when you are prone to introduce a code, for example, like Microsoft?
Yeah, for example.
I think in the end, it's always a term of like social engineering, right? If you can trick the user into doing that, and if you can get the code from the real website, as long as you can do that, it's harder, but it's just building a trustful story and conducting it. So it's definitely harder, but.
Thank you.
Okay. More hands? Good. Now you're safe. Thank you again, Jorge.